Resourceful Designer, episode 235. Learning a new design skill is easier than you think.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He drinks over 50 ounces of water every day. Mark Decote.
Yep, staying hydrated is not only good for your physical health, but it's also good for your mental health. It keeps you focused and it helps those creative juices flow. And from a recent question I asked in the Resourceful Designer Facebook group, it looks like I'm not the only person who prefers their drinking water at room temperature. In fact, the majority of those people who responded like theirs the same. Now, you're not here to hear me talk about water, you're here to listen to me talk about running a design business. Well, in this episode, I'm going to try to put your mind at ease regarding learning new design skills. Really, it's not that hard as you think. I'm also going to share a design trick to help you become a better designer. Now, what have I been up to? Well, I've been working on a number of projects this week. You know, I absolutely love the diversity of being a home-based designer, somebody who gets to choose their clients and has so many different projects to work on. I met with 3 new clients this week on Tuesday, 2 of them for podcast artwork, and one of them was for a brand design. They want me to design their logo and the overall brand. And the first 2 are podcast artworks. One of them is for a show about women dealing with infertility issues, and the other one is for a podcast about racial injustice. And the brand I've been asked to develop is in the, let's call it the cigar enthusiasts space. And it's meeting clients like this that makes me feel so grateful that I get to work on such a wide, varying degree of projects. Now, what I also feel grateful for is the Resourceful Designer community. Now, unfortunately, at the time that I'm releasing this episode, I just closed enrollment to the community. I warned you that at the end of October I would be closing it, and I did. I want to welcome the several new people who did join before I close the doors. I look forward to getting to know you and helping you with any way I can with your design business. And if you wanted to join but you missed, rest assured that I'll be reopening the Resourceful Designer community to new members in early 2021. I'm going to take some time, maybe do some tweaks to the community, get to know the people, do a lot of engagement before opening it up again. But if you do want to join and you miss this chance, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community and fill out the sign-up form there to be notified for when it will open again. Once again, that's resourcefuldesigner.com/community. Now, this week's tip of the week. This week's tip stems from an interaction within the Resourceful Designer community. Nico was sharing a logo, actually the icon for a logo that he's developing for a client. And there was just something about the logo that didn't seem quite right. He wasn't sure what it was, and we were looking at it. And then I suggested that he applied the golden ratio, or more specifically, the golden spiral to it. You see, there was a specific curve to his design, and the curve just wasn't sitting right. So I suggested that he try the golden spiral and readjust the curve. And man, what a difference it made. The new logo, once he adjusted it, looked 100 times better than the original one. And the original one looked pretty good. Now, I know that the golden ratio and the golden spiral, and if you're not familiar with what that is, it's actually a calculation that appears in nature, flowers and anyways, I'm not going to get into it, but it's a natural phenomenon. And many designers for many years have saying, if you apply it to our design work, it makes more aesthetically pleasing designs. Now, there's a lot of designers who swear by it, and a lot of them that think the whole thing is just kind of hokey. And I'll be honest, I rarely use it, but there are certain situations when applying the golden spiral or the golden ratio to a design can really help improve it, like the case with Nico's icon that he was designing. Now, I have a PNG file that I don't even remember where I got it. I downloaded it on the internet, a PNG file that I use so I can drop it into Photoshop on top of something and just check the proportions, check the curves, check the layout, check the positioning. And every once in a while, as I said, I don't do this on most projects, but every once in a while I will pull this up, and it always seems to help to tweak my designs to be that much better. Because after all, if Mother Nature can use it, why can't we? So that's this week's tip of the week, is if you're having trouble with a design, you're not sure what to improve on, or there's just something that isn't quite sitting right with you when you look at it, why not try placing the golden spiral on top of it and see if there's any way that it can be improved. So that's this week's tip of the week. And now, learning a new design skill is easier than you think. I recently posted a question in the Resourceful Designer Facebook group, which, by the way, if you're not a member of the group, you can join by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/group. And be sure to answer the 3 questions that I ask. If you don't answer the questions, I don't let you in, no matter who you are. Now, I recently posted in the group or asked a question saying, what design-related skills do you not have that you wish you did have? And although there were plenty of very interesting answers, one answer kept popping up, and that was web design. And after several people wrote web design, I posted another question in the group asking, what's the difference between print design and web design? And I'm not talking about the tools that you use in that. I just said right down to it. What's the difference between print and web design? And Mila hit the nail right on the head with his answer when he said the usage is different, but the design principles are the same. And I couldn't agree more with that answer. Even though print design and web design seem like 2 completely different beasts, at the core of both of them are the foundations, the principles that govern what is good design. I got into web design in the mid-90s, when at that point it was more of a novelty for a business to have a website. I mean, most businesses didn't even have an email at the time, so to have a website, there was few and far between when it came to them. And when I started doing web design, this is while I was still working at the print shop. I was doing web design at the print shop. At that time, I was offering something unique, at least in our area. You see, most websites in the early to mid 90s were built by computer programmers. And not to be stereotypical, but most computer programmers don't know anything about design. So my sales pitch back then was, you can either have an ugly website with beautiful code that nobody but the programmer sees, or you can have a great looking website with perfectly functioning code, even though if you were to look at it, it wouldn't be that pretty. And a lot of people sided with wanting a good looking website as opposed to good looking code. You can't blame them, can you? As a designer, what I brought to the table was the aesthetics of good design. Now, of course, thinking back to those first few websites I created, they were not very good by today's standards. But they were designed and not just built. I took the skills that I learned as a print designer and I applied those skills to web design. And I still do the exact same thing today with the websites I build now. What I'm getting at is, if you are a print designer who would like to learn web design, the process is not as difficult as you may believe, because you're already halfway there. Let me try to describe this using an analogy. I presume you know how to drive a car. If you don't, bear with me and try to imagine that you do. I want you to think back to when you were first learning to drive and everything that you needed to learn. You had to learn the rules of the road. What do all the street signs mean? When are you allowed to change lanes or when not to change lanes? You needed to know how far you needed to be behind the vehicle ahead of you. You needed to know what to do when multiple cars arrive at a 4-way stop at the exact same time. And by the way, here in North America, the car on the far right has the right of way in that situation. But on top of the rules of the road, you also had to learn how to operate a vehicle. How much pressure do you need to put on the accelerator to get the car moving without it jerking quickly or whatever? How much force do you need to put on the brake pedal to stop the car where you want it to stop? That's all stuff that now that you've been driving, you probably don't even give it much thought. You just do it. But back then, you had to learn that stuff. You had to learn how much to turn the steering wheel in order to direct your car around a curve in the road or to turn at a 90-degree corner. And you had to learn that during that turn, when do you have to start straightening out the wheels in order to proceed in the proper direction? You also have to learn how to turn on and use your directional signals. You learned how to look into your mirrors. You learned to check your blind spots, and so on and so on. When you think about every small aspect of learning to drive, there was an awful lot of stuff that you needed to know. Most of it you take for granted today and never think twice about it. Now, imagine as an experienced car driver, with all the skills you have, you now want to learn how to drive a motorcycle. Now, you're going to have a much easier time learning to drive a motorcycle than someone who is learning to drive a motorbike as their first vehicle. If they don't know how to drive a car already, learning to drive a motorcycle is going to be much harder for them than it would be for you. And why is that? It's because the foundations you already know. The fundamentals, the principles of driving are the same, whether you're driving a car or you're driving a motorcycle. The street signs are all the same. The rules of the road are the same. The accelerator and the brakes on a motorcycle may be different than those on a car, but your previous knowledge of how to apply them to a car will help you get accustomed to them much faster on a motorcycle than somebody who's never tried before. You're still going to use turn signals. You're still going to check your blind spots, etc., etc. If you already know how to drive a car, learning to drive a motorcycle is so much easier than if you didn't know how to drive a car. Well, the same applies to print designers learning web design. The foundations of good design, the principles that you follow on every print piece that you design, apply just the same to a web page as they do to a piece of paper. You want to create a visual hierarchy. You want to create a flow for the eye to follow. You want to pair fonts that work well together. You want to use colors. You want to use photos. You want to use other design elements that complement each other to create a visually pleasant layout. The principles of design are the same regardless if it's print or it's web. What's different are the tools you use and the medium you're creating on. One of them is a sheet of paper, and the other one is a screen of pixels. Think back to when you first started designing. Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, or in my case, Quark Express. They all seemed very daunting the first time you ever looked at them. Wow, they can do so much. How am I ever going to learn how to use this program? And yet now you have no problems with them. And that's because you experimented, you practiced, and you learned how to use them. It's the same thing with web design, only the tools are things like WordPress or Squarespace or Wix. And I'm not talking about coding here. Coding is something completely different. There was a time when coding and web design went hand in hand. That's how I learned. I was coding websites. But now, in 2020, 2021, that's not the case anymore. There are plenty of good web designers out there making a great living designing websites for clients who don't know anything about code. And if for some reason you do end up needing code to accomplish something on a site you're building, good old Uncle Google is always there to help you. It's not that intimidating. So just like learning to drive a motorcycle is so much easier if you already know how to drive a car because it's the same driving principles apply to both vehicles, learning web design is so much easier if you already know the principles behind what makes good design. So start off small. Get a Wix or a Squarespace account if WordPress intimidates you too much. Then, once you get comfortable designing sites on those platforms, branch out and give WordPress a try. Themes or page builders like Elementor, or of course my preference, Divi from Elegant Themes, they're very intuitive and very easy to learn, and they allow you to build amazing looking and amazingly functional websites without having to put in a single line of code. You know what they say, anything is easy once you know how to do it. Well, as far as web design, if you're already a print designer, you're more than halfway there to knowing how to do it. All you need to do is practice with the new tools. So don't be afraid. Give it a try. And before long, you'll be adding web design to your list of design services. Now, I would love to know if you're going to give it a shot. Leave me a comment at this episode at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 235 and let me know, are you a print designer who's going to give web design a try? Just take everything you already know about print design and apply the same principles to the web, and you'll do fine. So there you have it. I know it's a short episode this week. It was just a single topic. I saw that in the Facebook group, and I thought, this is something I really should share with the podcast listeners. And I also want to say that even though I don't know anything about animation or motion graphics or any of the other things that people said they wish they had those skills, the same principles apply. If you want to do animation or motion graphics or any of that stuff, the design principles you learned either in print design or web design or whatever will help you reach your goal that much faster in whatever medium you decide to choose. So that's it for this episode. I want to remind you of the tip of the week, the golden ratio. Give it a shot in your design and you'll see how it can improve the overall look of what you're designing. And if you're kicking yourself because you missed the chance to join the Resourceful Designer community, head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community and sign up to be notified when the doors open again. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.